everyone. I hope that we can all hear this. Thumbs up, yes, good, okay. Thank you so very much for joining us. My name is Jenny McDowell. I am the Director of Government Relations with the International Trademark Association. INTA and GIPC are delighted to join the 6th annual Congressional Trademark Caucus, or CTC briefing. As you all know, the CTC is a bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers who are focused on highlighting the vital role that trademarks play in boosting the economy, in creating jobs, and providing trust to American consumers. Each December, this event helps us to focus attention on counterfeit products during the holiday season. This year, our theme focuses on consumer shopping tips to safeguard against counterfeits. INTA's work on counterfeiting is one of our main policy priorities. We work in partnership with all stakeholders to advocate for stronger anti-counterfeiting measures, both online and offline, to promote cooperation and enforcement across the various agencies, and to increase awareness about the harms of counterfeiting. Just to highlight one of our many INTA initiatives, the Unreal campaign, we educate young consumers aged 14 to 23 about the importance of trademarks and brands. And we try to actually reduce or stop the demand for counterfeits. Since the inception of that program in 2012, that campaign has reached over 55,000 students in 130 cities around the world in 21 different languages. So when we talk about counterfeits, what do we really mean here? You know, in its simplest form, counterfeits are products that are made without the authorization of the brand owner, that are either indistinguishable, meaning identical, or you really can't distinguish them from the genuine product. These fakes or dupes are often made with toxic ingredients, substandard components, and they threaten the health and safety of purchasers who think unwittingly that they're buying the genuine quality product. Criminals actually prefer to sell fakes on the internet for many reasons. You know, it could include the anonymity of the internet, the global reach of possible sales, or the difficulties that are often associated with prosecuting in foreign jurisdictions. Counterfeit products are really a threat at all times, but it is particularly at this time of the year when our purchasing activities increase dramatically that we are vulnerable to pervasive criminal activities. You know, in financial terms, the US government estimated in 2020 that counterfeit and pirated goods are a $500 billion, yes, with a T, dollar industry. And the economic impact of counterfeiting continues to grow exponentially. That means lost tax revenue, lost wages, lost legitimate sales. Furthermore, counterfeiters don't comply with a host of laws like environmental, labor laws, consumer protection laws, which only compounds the economic risk and the health and safety risk. While the link between increased sales of counterfeits on the internet and the harms that it causes to businesses and the public is clear, the solution to the issue is complex and remains very challenging. INTA has adopted many board resolutions aimed at addressing counterfeiting, including our best practices to address the sale of counterfeits on the internet, which was updated very recently in 2021. Another board resolution, which was adopted in March of 2021, focuses on preventing goods from reaching the market by cutting off the monetary resources of counterfeit sellers by either seizing or freezing assets. There is no one magic bullet, but there are many ways in which we can all work together to fight this problem. In this briefing, you will be hearing from leaders of the CTC who are working very diligently to address these issues. Law enforcement and stakeholder experts will also discuss the scope of the problem, the steps being taken to combat the manufacture and sale of counterfeits, programs to educate consumers on how to protect themselves, ways to report criminal activity, and other very important information. We hope that you will find this informative session, that it makes a real impact in how you think about products and services and what you're buying these days. With that, I will pass the microphone over to Frank Cullen, TIPC. Thank you.
Thanks you, Jenny, and thanks for your leadership and also the partnership on today's program, but also throughout the year. The work INTA does on these issues on behalf of its members is meaningful and very important, and we want to thank you for all your efforts. I also want to thank everyone for making time to join us today. As Jenny mentioned, we're here to talk about a really huge problem that impacts not only the health and safety of consumers, but our economy more broadly. Jenny gave you some of the numbers, but not only is there an economic impact in terms of the bottom line for our nation's industry, there's also huge job loss. And this is really an important issue to raise, because as we look at America's competitiveness and our ability to also have good paying domestic jobs, it's really important that we understand the role that counterfeits play in terms of impacting legitimate businesses and also, once again, threatening the safety of consumers. So at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where I work, I'm at the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we recognize the important role all IP-centric industries play in strengthening our economy, creating high-paying jobs, and also benefiting consumers and their quality of life. Counterfeits occur across every industry sector, and the Chamber recognizes that this threat to the health and safety of consumers is also matched by the threat to industry, as I mentioned before. It doesn't matter if you're talking about toys, consumer electronics, luxury goods, even prescription medicines. If you have a product that's successful in the marketplace, someone is going to try to knock it off and rip you off. So the truth of the matter is, your constituents really need to be warned about the threat of counterfeits. And as policymakers, there's an important role to be played to ensure that we push back about what is really not a victimless crime here. It's really a serious criminal enterprises that affect so many people globally. As we go forward with today's discussion, as Jenny said, not only will you be hearing from industry experts, but also some of the leaders on the Hill. We're very fortunate that we have some committed leadership in Congress to deal with these very serious issues. And in just a moment, we'll be hearing from one of the co-chairs of the Congressional Trademark Caucus. The Chamber, and as Jenny said, INTA, have been delighted to have the opportunity over the past several years to be part of these CTC briefings to really help congressional staff understand the scope of this issue, the impact on your constituents, and potential solutions to these very serious problems. So with that, I'd prefer that we go right into it, and I'd really welcome the opportunity to have you hear from one of the co-chairs of our Congressional Trademark Caucus, a true leader in Congress on intellectual property issues. He's truly somebody who needs no introduction because he's been leading on these issues for so many years. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. As some of you know, Senator Grassley has shown a keen interest in these issues, not only as chair of the Congressional Trademark Caucus, but also when he chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, and his work as ranking member at the Senate Finance Committee, and his continued leadership along with his other co-chairs of the CTC to really help bring these issues to the forefront and also to bring forward real solutions. As a matter of fact, we have to compliment Senator Grassley for moving the needle forward by his legislation that really helps increase the information sharing that occurs between industry and law enforcement to really push back against this criminal threat. So it's my distinct honor and real pleasure to really kick off today's program, the chair and one of the founding chairs of the Congressional Trademark Caucus, Senator Chuck Grassley.
Good afternoon. I'm Senator Chuck Grassley, ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm also co-chair of the Congressional Trade Caucus, which was established to encourage collaboration between industry stakeholders and policymakers on trademark-related issues. One goal of the caucus has been to increase awareness among the dangers of counterfeits and the role trademarks play in helping to protect consumers and brand owners all alike. There's been a surge in counterfeit goods all over the world. We saw this during the COVID crisis with fake protective gear, masks, hand sanitizers, and other products. Some estimate that the 1/4 of U.S. consumers have unknowingly purchased a counterfeit product online. During the holiday season, Americans increasingly rely on the internet to purchase gifts for their loved ones. Unfortunately, criminals exploit the online marketplace, opening storefronts stocked with counterfeit and stolen goods. These listings look authentic to the unsuspecting customers. Often, counterfeit products don't meet safety standards or comply with quality controls. There's also been an increase in professional shoplifters reselling high-value items online. Online shoppers deserve to have confidence that their purchases are safe and authentic. Congress is considering legislative proposals to put a stop to the wave of counterfeits and stolen goods online. I introduced S. 1159 so businesses can get more information about the integrity of their supply chain. This bill was included in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act that passed the Senate earlier this year. I also joined several of my colleagues to introduce a bill that we call the Inform Act. This bill would provide better verification and greater transparency so consumers can trust that the products they purchase are legitimate. Voluntary efforts by big tech companies are a good first step, but they just aren't enough. We should promote better screening, more transparent seller information, and increase collaboration with law enforcement. Finally, there needs to be better consumer awareness about the dangers of counterfeit and stolen goods online. So I'm pleased to work with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center and the International Trademark Association to shed light on this problem and to help safeguard against counterfeits during the holiday shopping season. I wish everyone safe and happy holidays.
Thank you, Senator Grassley, and thank you for your leadership. I would be remiss if I did not also thank the other co-chairs of the Congressional Trademark Caucus, Senator Chris Coons, Representative Ted Deutch, and Representative Michael McCaul. This is truly a bipartisan and in many ways nonpartisan issue. And of course, it's great to see bicameral leadership on these issues in Congress and folks who are really paying attention to a real threat to our economy and to the health and safety of our consumers. This is particularly true during the pandemic, as the senator pointed out. Criminals are clever. They're taking new opportunities to use new tactics and new ways to fool consumers into buying dangerous fakes. And it's very important that we learn what some of these new techniques are and also how consumers can protect themselves. We hope that you'll be able to direct your constituents, for those of you who work on the Hill, to some of the tools that are going to be made available to you during today's briefing. And this is something that is not going to go away after the holiday shopping season ends. It's a year-round concern, and it's something we work on every day at the Chamber. So with that, I'm really delighted to have the opportunity today to introduce some true experts on these issues. We have representatives from government and from the private sector who are here to share their expertise, provide their insights, and give you some real world perspective on how we're dealing with this very serious problem. So we're going to have a panel discussion. During the panel discussion, as I said, you'll hear from the experts. And then at the end of our discussion, we're going to open it up to a question and answer period. The way it'll work best is if you are following along during the discussion and have questions, if you can type your questions into the chat feature in the Zoom platform, and then we'll go ahead and select questions and pose those to the various experts on our panel. If there's a specific question for a panelist, please identify which panelist you'd like to have that question asked of, or I'll go ahead and just direct it to the one I think makes the most sense. And with that, it's again my real honor and delight to be able to introduce our panel. Joining us today is Matthew Allen. He is the director of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, better known as the Iprcenter, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Also, Laurie Dempsey, Director, IPR and E-Commerce Division, Trade Policy and Programs. at U.S. Customs and Border Protection in their Office of Trade. Melissa Roth, the Vice President of Brand Protection Global for Burberry. And Maury Lauren Ilagan with Olaplex, who is their Senior IP Counsel. Each one of these experts has taken time from their busy schedules to share their thoughts. And without reading their bios, I thought it'd be more interesting if we heard directly from them and got a sense of how they view the work they're doing and also some of the ways and reasons their organizations are involved in these issues. So to kick us off, I'd like to invite Matt Allen to perhaps share a little bit about his background, his current role, and his work at the Iprcenter. Matt?
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to join the group today and talk about the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. By way of introduction, I am, my parent organization is Homeland Security Investigations, and I've been a special agent with HSI for more than 32 years and have employed by the federal government for more than 35 years. And so I've had, worked in every customs discipline that HSI investigates, and so really well positioned to talk a little bit about the challenge that we face. And just to kind of talk a little bit from the perspective of the IPR Center, which represents 27 different organizations who have some nexus to IP enforcement and facilitating lawful trade. I think in your introduction, you talked about the holiday season and kind of where we are. And I think in many people's perspectives, we're in the home stretch of the holiday shopping season. On November 22nd, the IPR Center partnered with HSI, Customs and Border Protection, the FBI, and the Toy Association to put out our holiday shopping guide. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes, but that's kind of the perspective that we bring to the challenge today.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate your leadership at the IPR Center and also your focus on these important issues. Next, I'd like to invite Laurie Dempsey to share a little bit of her perspective working on these issues as part of the e-commerce division over at CBP. Laurie, perhaps you could share a little bit about your background, your role at CBP, and some of the things you're most focused on these days.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. And hello, everyone. Very happy to be here today with all of you. So I started my federal career nearly 30 years ago as a baby import specialist in the Port of Los Angeles. And IPR was a priority even back then. That was when U.S. Customs, we were U.S. Customs Service, we were actually under Department of Treasury. So fast forward to 2007, we've now got DHS and CBP, and IP protection and enforcement continued to be a huge priority for CBP, so much so that we made it what we call a priority trade issue, PTI. And it's one of 7. And we really focus our resources on these critical high-risk areas that we believe create the biggest problem for Americans, consumers, the public, et cetera, et cetera. So the work that CBP does in terms of IP protection enforcement kind of falls into 3 broad categories. The first is educate the public. So we've talked a little bit about public awareness. We're going to be talking more about that later. Then there's the engage, and this is with our private sector partners. We understand that this is going to take a team effort to really wipe out counterfeits. And then third is enforce. So CBP has seizure authority at the borders, and so we're able to, when we detect and suspect counterfeit goods, we're able to examine and seize when we find that they are counterfeit. So super high level overview of the work that CBP is doing. And we've all kind of heard allusions to e-commerce and online shopping, and that has become a huge challenge for CBP just in terms of the volume. When you're talking about numbers, we saw over 750 million small packages entering the US. So if you break it down in terms of how many that is per day, it's around 2 million per day. That's a lot of volume for these small packages. So we can talk more a little bit further, but that's just kind of the quick version.
Well, thanks so much, Laurie. And again, also appreciate your leadership. The Chamber was thrilled to have the opportunity to partner with CBP, not only as part of the educating consumers during the holiday season through our satellite media tour earlier this year before Thanksgiving, but also with a historic MOU, a memorandum of understanding we can talk a little bit more about later between the Chamber and the U.S. government for the first time ever. So we think that that's really terrific that we have the opportunity to work so closely with you, and certainly enjoyed the collaboration. We have some great folks from the private sector joining us. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that they're taking time from their day jobs to share their personal perspectives, not speak on behalf of their companies. They're here because they have a wealth of experience in the private sector dealing with these issues. And our first speaker from the private sector is Melissa Roth. Melissa is VP of Brand Protection Global at Burberry, as I mentioned earlier, but we'd certainly like to hear a little bit more about her experience and also her current role, but understanding that you are speaking today in your personal capacity and not representing Burberry officially. So, Melissa?
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here today. I started my career in branding and intellectual property about 20 years ago, first in public relations and then as a lawyer protecting brands. I luckily found my way to Burberry, where I've been for the past 14 years. Originally, knocking down doors with Customs and Border Protection and the NYPD, which I do fondly miss now that they have me trapped behind a desk all the time. And later leading the Americas brand protection and anti-counterfeiting and infringement enforcement efforts. Now I lead the global team for Burberry and all of our anti-counterfeiting and intellectual property protection worldwide. And for us, that's a team of 21 in 6 countries around the world. And we've very firmly realized that we can't do it by ourselves, and we can't do it as we operate in a silo. And that's not only within our company, but within our global team. We work very collaboratively across jurisdictions and also across platforms and with government partners. It's been a really great team effort, and I'm pleased to be here to share more about it today. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate you taking the time today. Our final panelist is someone who also represents her personal views, not the views of the company that she is currently with, Mary Lauren Logan. Mary Lauren has had a long career in this field. She serves as senior IP counsel, as I said before, for Olaplex, and was previously with Mary Kay. So Mary Lauren, perhaps you could share some of your perspectives and your background.
Thanks, Frank. Yes, so hi everyone, pleasure to be here with you. As Frank mentioned, I was Director of Intellectual Property at Mary Kay Inc. For almost 10 years, working a lot in building their IP portfolio, but also protecting the brand around the world. As you can imagine, with skincare, cosmetics and whatnot, counterfeiting problems were a serious issue for us because we care about our consumers and what they put on their faces. And we want to make sure that they are getting genuine products and getting safe products. I actually recently joined a new company called Olaplex, which is a hair care company, a beauty care company, to basically do a similar thing as I was doing at Mary Kay, building their IP portfolio and also helping protect their brand across the globe. Olaplex is a new company, relatively new company. They're growing and expanding internationally, and this problem of counterfeiting is inevitably going to touch them in a significant way, as I've seen in the past. But very much like Melissa, it is a cross-functional problem that requires collaboration amongst business teams, local enforcement, and then industry partnerships within the cosmetics industry. I think one of the best examples I've seen with counterfeiting and brand protection in the industry is the automotive industry. They have done some great coalitions to combat counterfeiting for themselves and combine their efforts to get information, find the source, and address counterfeit products that are coming, especially on e-commerce, retail sites and whatnot. And I think there's more to be done in other industries, and I'd love to be able to see that happen in the beauty industry as well. And hoping to replicate something like that in the near future.
Well, thanks for that, Mary Lauren, and thanks also for the great work you're doing. The truth of the matter is, this is not something that's going to be solved by enforcing our way out of it, arresting all the bad guys. This is a problem that requires solutions coming from industry, as well as from government, as well as from law enforcement. It requires people working together. So I'm so delighted you referenced the Auto Industry Coalition as an example of how industry can work to help itself. And this is something that at the Chamber we are focused on, which are industry to industry solutions, but also understanding the unique role the US government and our law enforcement agencies can play and how we can work most collaboratively. So perhaps following up on that just a moment, I'd like to go back to Matt. And Matt, maybe it'd be helpful if some of the folks who don't maybe have as much familiarity, not just with the scope of the problem, but with some of the tactics and the type of criminal organizations that are now involved in this kind of crime. A lot of folks in the past have thought about this, as something that, really wasn't that big of a deal because, maybe it was a, fake handbag or a knockoff sweater or something that, was not really going to be a significant issue if they purchased something that was not genuine. But increasingly, we've seen dangerous criminal organizations turning more to counterfeiting as a source of revenue, and they are also changing and creating much more sophisticated tactics. Can you talk a little bit about what the IPR Center is seeing in terms of tactics and the types of criminals that are involved in these crimes?
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost, counterfeiting and the sale and trafficking of counterfeit merchandise is a global threat and a global problem. One of the bread and butter areas of expertise for HSI is transnational crime, and counterfeiting and the trafficking of counterfeit goods falls squarely into the bucket of transnational crime. Many of the same cartels and criminal syndicates that many people would be familiar with that are involved in drug trafficking or human trafficking are actually very well diversified criminal organizations, and they are deeply entrenched in the counterfeiting world. I think one of the ways to make it relevant is that criminal elements don't really care where they earn their illicit money. They're just in the business of making money illicitly. And I think one of the things, particularly for this audience, that's very relevant is that criminal organizations do make calculations about risk and reward. And I think traditionally one of the things we've come to know is that counterfeiting is a fairly low risk, high reward endeavor. And by that, I mean, it's very often difficult, first of all, to identify the networks because they are global in nature, and then conduct really good comprehensive investigations that document them, but then get them into court. In our case, primarily we're focused on getting people into federal court and charged with federal crimes, but there's also tools that allow us to do it in the state system. But in the end, even when we have a successful investigation and a prosecution, sadly, very often the outcome are very low sentences, and in some cases, very low criminal forfeitures for those organizations. And so that really is a very significant challenge for us. Sometimes these are organizations that are almost hiding in plain sight, and it is very much a challenge for us. In terms of impact, you've heard a little bit about it already, but I think, for us, one of our main priorities is health and safety, and that's certainly relevant during the holiday season. And so things that go on your body or in your body, and then obviously during the holiday season, one of the most common gifts given are consumer electronics. And so we're very focused not just on the electronics themselves, but what goes in them, in particular things like batteries, counterfeit batteries, and other counterfeit electronic components make products very, very vulnerable to fire and causing fires. And so that is one of the areas where we focus a lot. In terms of trends on how products are delivered, again, you've heard a little bit of that from Laurie in particular. How we all shop has changed quite a bit. And so we certainly live in a very point, click, and ship world. And many of us will shop online for our holiday gifts. And that presents, as others have mentioned, really significant challenges. It creates certainly the perception of anonymity on the part of criminal organizations that we work against to eliminate and bring them to justice. But it makes it very challenging for the consumer to identify and filter out counterfeit goods as they're shopping for goods. And the two areas that I would kind of focus on before we move on is third-party vendors on e-commerce websites. I think for us at the IPR Center, that's one of the very significant vulnerabilities that we've identified in the marketplace. And the other area that I think we'll probably end up talking about much more today is social media advertising. More and more, we see social media advertising as one of the ways that illicit organizations connect to consumers unwittingly and get them to buy counterfeit goods.
Thanks, Matt. Laurie, perhaps I could turn to you and follow up a little bit on what Matt talked about, but also perhaps expand a little bit more on Matt's comment. You know, obviously consumer electronics, a big item of sale during the holiday shopping season. But what other types of products do you think are more likely to be presented as counterfeits, or is it simply an all of the above? And also following up on what Matt said, since you are tasked at CBP with interdiction and trying to really stem the flow and be able to identify those counterfeits coming into the country, you know, some of the challenges that you're faced with as we have pivoted away from the big cargo boxes to different types of shipping, you know, so perhaps some thoughts, questions. One, you know, what type of products are most likely to be counterfeit, and two, some of the tactics that are now being utilized in terms of impacting your ability to interdict. So turn it over to you, Laurie.
Sure, Frank. So yes, in terms of what we're seeing with trends and what we're seizing with counterfeit goods, honestly, the biggest category are the luxury goods, handbags, wallets, watches, belts, shoes. That is the majority of our seizures, but we also have a great deal of concern and try to focus on those issues that create health and safety. Mary Lauren mentioned the cosmetics, if it goes on your skin, if it goes in your body, those are some serious concerns for us. And we do seize those as well. Some pharmaceutical products, we see seizures of those. And again, that gets back to the health and safety aspect of things. So, you know, we try to balance all of our targeting depending on, you know, kind of what the risk areas are. I will say that, you know, when we're talking about luxury goods, and I think Matt made the point earlier about, well, it's just a handbag, counterfeit handbag, but what's behind it, you know, it could have been produced by child labor, forced labor, produced in factories that don't keep environmental standards, factories that don't honor labor laws, et cetera, et cetera. So the more that we can get that message out there, I think is critical, and that is embedded in our public awareness messaging. Then in terms of just overall seizure numbers, last year we seized over 27,000 shipments. And the value of those, if the goods had been genuine, the value was over $3.1 billion. So, you know, we talk about harm to the consumer. It's also harm to our economy, because it's competing with these legitimate brands who have based their trademark stands for the quality of the goods. And you know, when you buy a genuine product, what you're getting and all of the things that come along with it. So just, you know, we're plugging away at that. I think our latest struggle, it really does come down to this influx of small packages, and why that's a struggle is because for the small packages, we don't necessarily get as much data associated with the shipment. So it makes targeting more difficult. And we are taking steps to try and get more information about the package, what's in the package. Another thing that's made this difficult is the third-party platforms that we've talked about. They're what we call a non-traditional trade party. CBP normally deals with importers, brokers, carriers, these sectors of industry who follow the rules, they have compliance that's built in, and they've been doing this for years. So the online shopping has created a new dynamic for CBP in terms of how we get the right information from them, how we engage with them and bring them into our industry groups and the conversations that we have. So that's just, you know, that's where we are with that. And I guess my other point about the social media, you know, in past years for our public awareness campaigns, we've had advertisements at the airports, at international airports. And with the advent of, or the onset of COVID, I should say, we had to pivot. And so we made our campaigns more digital and including Instagram. So we are really trying to focus on those audiences, especially the younger crowd who maybe hasn't heard the message as much as others have. So.
Thank you, Laurie. Melissa, I'm going to turn to you, perhaps some of the trends that you're seeing. You know, you've been doing this work for a little while, and I think as someone who sees it from the private sector perspective, you know, what are some observations you might have that folks who, again, are not as familiar as how this impacts a company, and some of the things that perhaps maybe trends that have changed the way you look at doing your job, and some of the things that you think also create some of the threats to your your everyday bottom line work situation. So Melissa, your thoughts?
Thanks, Frank. So, something that Matt mentioned earlier is a trend that we've been seeing too. It's a major shift in who's the individual selling the counterfeit goods, particularly in the industry of luxury. We've seen a huge shift from drug activity to counterfeiting, particularly out in California. The reason is it's just safer to sell a counterfeit bag, right? You're dealing with purse parties, you're dealing with, teenagers and moms, and it's a really low risk sale to begin with. And then the penalties, they're slaps on the wrist. And it's really unfortunate. The sentencing doesn't go far enough. The cases plead out with a slap on the wrist, or we get stuck with a sympathetic jury. So it's a really low risk, big reward, right? For them to switch to this field. And so we've had to really shift the way that we think about combating counterfeits, right? When you, as a brand, to combat counterfeits, you almost have to think like a criminal, and you have to be a couple of steps ahead of them. And we've noticed that shift too. And the counterfeiters have gotten smarter over the years. I've noted, when I first started my career, people used to say, well, if it looked like it was too good to be true, then it probably was. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case anymore. You could make a lot of determinations online years ago based on price point, right? I could go onto an e-commerce website and I could sort by price, and I could say, okay, well, everything, anytime somebody was trying to sell a scarf or a handbag for under $50, well, it had to be counterfeit. Well, shoppers got smarter too, and they started looking for that. And the counterfeiters realized, well, if I sell that same item now for closer to what the real price was, but maybe mark it down by 20%, consumers are just going to think they're getting a good deal. So they've actually increased the price of the counterfeit goods. And no longer do I find that price, at least in the field of luxury goods, is an adequate indicator of something's authenticity. And the thing that's so sad about that is that the consumers are getting the same knockoff quality, poor quality goods. Not only do they have health and safety issues with regards to fragrance and cosmetics, but also just in the way that they're made. We've had customer complaints about shoe straps, the heels breaking, people twisting ankles, breaking feet, things are made poorly. But yet now they're also out a substantial amount of money. So the counterfeiters are getting $300, $400, $500 for a counterfeit scarf, which before they were getting 20 something dollars. We've also noticed a huge shift that it's not just being sold through third-party e-commerce platforms, but counterfeiters are very technologically savvy, and they will set up networks of hundreds upon hundreds of look-alike stand-alone websites. Starting in 2010, we have combated hundreds of thousands of Burberry outlet for you type sites. And you go online and they actually look just like our present website, and they are using our same ad campaign images, and they are stealing our stock photos. And so customers will actually think that they are purchasing it directly from us. So they're not even trying necessarily to get a big bargain. They think they're purchasing from an online Burberry outlet. And so it's a shame, because it's the consumers that are really being harmed. And we, of course, are being incidentally harmed as well, because when you're paying that much money for an item and it's really poor quality, the first instinct is not that it's fake. It's just, it was a waste of your money.
Yeah, it's really a shame, because we're also talking about a brand's reputation here, not just the health and safety of the consumer. That's, of course, foremost. And what's ironic, to your point, is that this shift for a more convenient shopping experience, and sometimes out of necessity during the time of COVID, has really created opportunity for some of these criminals to do things in a way that makes it so much tougher for the consumer to understand whether they're having a genuine experience and working with verified or safe sellers. So those are all great points, Melissa. Mary Lauren, I can't even imagine how challenging it must be when you have a product that people actually trust to put on their body, put on their face, and actually use as a personal care, or, something that is so, again, personal, that you have a counterfeit that is substandard, that may have some very adverse impacts on someone's health and safety. As a brand, how do you respond to, that threat and try to ensure that consumers do have the safe experience and deal with companies that are providing legitimate and safe goods. What are some of the things that you've seen in terms of your time in that industry sector that are particularly concerning, and how can consumers do a better job of being aware?
Sure. So, for brands, it's a lot about consumer education, and especially in the beauty care industry, you want to make sure your consumers are getting products from the right and authorized sources. And so there's been a push for communications via social media, on the websites that will say how to buy, where you can find us, and ensuring or encouraging consumers to actually follow that is important. And to put some perspective to the beauty industry, a couple of years ago, there was a seizure in LA in their fashion districts, which I understand is similar to, Canal Street in New York. And there were about $700,000 worth of fake counterfeit fake counterfeit cosmetic products of various well-known brands. And when those products were tested, they found animal feces, dangerous chemicals in those products. And to Melissa's point, and even Matt's point of the profit margin that these counterfeiters have, they can cut corners and use subpar product or subpar chemicals, poor storage conditions to get these products out on the market. And the consumers are the ones that are suffering. Imagine putting eyeshadow that has animal feces on your face unknowingly, thinking that it was actually the legitimate brand. And the consumer has their health at risk. And then that gets placed on the brand owner because that consumer thought they actually bought a legitimate product. They're going to call that brand owner's hotline, make a complaint, and the brand owner doesn't even know where that product came from, doesn't know who they can contact or take action against. And it just ultimately hurts the brand's reputation and truly the consumer, especially in this beauty care and skincare industry. The other thing that Melissa brought up that I think is a trend that has happened probably since the pandemic and with the change in consumer behavior of purchasing online is that price point difference. Yes, you could say, okay, it's a 50% discount, so likely not a real product. I think counterfeiters are getting to that 30%, 20% off discount, and consumers are legitimately thinking they're buying products directly from an authorized retailer of that brand owner, only to find out that it's subpar quality or it's not even the same thing. The other thing that I'm seeing is that kind of like what Matt touched on, that baiting and phishing on social media of social media ads or like sponsored posts that are using the stock images or the legitimate images of a brand owner and encouraging the users to click on this shop now. And that consumer thinks they're going to an authorized or official brand owner website or retail e-commerce site and purchasing what they think are legitimate products, and what they get is subpar or fake product. And there's just, in this new era of shopping and a push for e-commerce shopping, it's creating so many more complications for brand owners and less of those telling signs of what's a fake and what's not. And consumers, brand owners have to educate, everybody needs to educate consumers on this because they're the ones at serious risk with these counterfeit products.
Frank, if I can add to Mary Lauren's comments and Melissa's, I think to take that a step further, there's even another subset of this social media culture, and it's one in which consumers are not necessarily being duped. They're actually consciously and knowingly buying fakes, and it's a part of the market where they actually social media advertisers and what I would call social media influencers are actually openly marketing the hashtag fakes for whatever the brand is. And I find that to be one of the most egregious parts of this, because it's not just it's not even that the consumer is being unwittingly sold counterfeiting. They're part of what I would, in my trade, we would call a conspiracy. They are in an agreement with somebody else to buy counterfeit goods. And it's particularly egregious because both parties are completely knowledgeable about what they're engaging in. And I think the worry that I have is that over time, that tends to normalize the behavior, and people end up thinking that it's not a crime. And again, back to one of the original things that you started with, is that this is a crime. Our country has matured to a knowledge and innovation economy. And to put it simply, from a criminal justice point of view, this is theft. People are stealing the knowledge and the know-how and the creativity of, in many cases, small and medium-sized enterprises. That one of the areas of focus for us in our IP enforcement is to partner with small and medium enterprise companies who, in the end, are the largest employers in our country. And we are trying to support their businesses by vigorously enforcing the IP laws. And this kind of knowing criminality, where both parties are completely aware and accepting of the criminal conspiracy they're engaged in, are stealing the goods and the knowledge and the know-how of so many companies out there.
That's a really important point you make, Matt. Laurie, I don't know if you perhaps have a perspective on that as well, but just from an industry perspective, I think this really amplifies the importance of making sure consumers are better educated, that this is not a victimless crime. This does have serious consequences. And there's also an economic impact to perhaps even jobs in their own community. But Laurie, I'll turn to you.
Sure. So I would like to add to that, Frank. CBP is also working with small and medium-sized enterprises. This is actually the year of the SME, and we've had focused webinars once a month to educate the small and medium-sized businesses about not only CBP processes, but how to protect their IP. We have the ability to have the trademark owners record their mark with CBP, and that in turn enables us to enforce it when we have shipments coming in. And I heard a story just this morning about this mom who came up with a sling to put the baby in at a restaurant, and it was this really clever, creative idea. And not soon after she started selling this, there were fakes popping up online. So, just as fast as we can try and track them down, just as fast as the product comes out, the counterfeiters are just right behind them. So, and it's a struggle in many, many ways. So again, back to the getting the word out as much as we can and helping consumers understand that this really is a critical issue is very important to us.
Couldn't agree more. And we all have a role to play here. I'm sensitive that the time is just running away. We don't have a lot of time left. And I do want to offer an opportunity for some questions. But before we go to that, I want to also once again thank Laurie and CBP for the opportunity we had to partner with them as part of our Shop Smart campaign this year. We hit a whole slew of media markets to try to put the messaging out about the threat of counterfeits, particularly during the holiday shopping season. And I know CBP and the Iprcenter and even the individual companies all have programs to educate consumers. So Laurie, while I have you, perhaps you talk just a little bit more about how shoppers can get more information about counterfeit goods and some of the truths behind that.
Sure. So I would point folks to our website, cbp.gov. There's an IPR priority trade issue page that's got a wealth of information. I should probably also mention where folks should go if they want to report suspected counterfeit goods. So there's a couple different ways. So the first is we have what's called an online portal for e-allegations. That's also available on cbp.gov, or they can call 1-800-BE-ALERT. And so that's one, those are two ways. And then we also work very closely with HSI and the Iprcenter. They have a way to report counterfeit goods at the iprcenter.gov/referral or by phone at 866-IPR-2060.
Thanks, Laurie. And Matt, I know the IPRcenter has done a lot of work to try to educate consumers. And as Laurie mentioned, it has a click button on its website that allows you to report these kinds of IP crimes. Perhaps a few thoughts from you about the work at the IPRcenter to educate consumers and how you can best report crime.
Well, Laurie was really helpful and gave out our website. I would say, for consumers, if you're not going to shop in person at a, brick and mortar store, go to known websites that you've shopped at before. I think it's always safe for you to find your brand before somebody purports to be that brand finding you through a social media website. And if you're going to shop on one of the large e-commerce marketplaces, really focus on and be wary of third-party sellers that are lurking on those sites sometimes. So that's it from us.
Thanks, Matt. And honestly, you can even go to your local police if you suspect you've been a victim of a crime. The key here is to make sure that you just don't ignore an interaction with a criminal or the purchase of counterfeit. Report the crime, give law enforcement the opportunity to go after these bad guys and stop this type of a practice. At the Chamber, we've put together a program called Shop Smart. You can visit uschamber.com/Shop Smart. You can get our top 10 tips to stay safe during this holiday shopping season. Our catchphrase is, we want people to open real happiness, not disappointment during the holiday season. And that means real, genuine goods. I'm going to give Melissa and Mary Lauren the last word before we turn over to our Q&A. If any of our folks who've joined today's briefing have any questions. Melissa, could I just ask you perhaps to share any last observations you have before we turn to Q&A?
I would just say that something else that consumers could do is actually check with the manufacturer of the product of where their authorized sellers are. Maybe it is an Amazon, maybe it is a Walmart or a Target, but they also usually have lists. So trust the source of the products that you're purchasing. And I just also wanted, to thank the Iprcenter and Customs and Border Protection, because we definitely couldn't be protecting our brand as well as we are without their support. Our company was founded over 165 years ago and by a 21-year-old kid, and we're still thriving because we've been able to protect our intellectual property, and that's part of a big partnership. So thank you both.
Well, before we pivot over to Mary Lauren, I just want to follow up on that for 1 second. One thing we didn't touch on, which I think is a little bit in the weeds, but important for folks on the Hill to know, is that it's very important that we have the opportunity for industry and law enforcement to work together. And one of the best ways for them to do that is to share information. And in the past, we've seen some challenges in terms of how that's actually worked in practice, but we're very pleased and encouraged by the fact that industry and law enforcement are really working much more closely together to share information about these counterfeiters and how to really stop this scourge. So Melissa, just very briefly, can you just mention, is that something you find useful?
Absolutely. I think that everybody is privy to a certain amount of information, but it can be kept in silos. And the only way that we'll be able to have a full 360-degree view of what's going on is to collaborate. And it's either with other members of the industry. We're not competitors when it comes to combating counterfeits. And I work very closely all the time with my peer brands, or whether it's with local or federal law enforcement or law enforcement around the world. I think it's a big team collaborative effort. And only by working together, we'll be able to stop the gap and prevent the sale and import of counterfeit merchandise into the United States.
Thanks, Melissa. Mary Lauren, you are absolutely going to get the last word on this, but I'm going to ask you exactly the same question I asked Melissa. Some of your observations on things we may not have touched on, but also the importance of information sharing as you do your job.
Yeah, so same thing. Everyone's touched on everything that I think is extremely important, and that's just buy from a verified source. Check with the brand owner or their brand website, and they will tell you where to buy authorized genuine goods. And then the other thing, I think it was a point that you made, Frank, is report it. If you do buy counterfeit products, even if it might be $5 or something like that, report it. The information that you have as a consumer of that shipping label or an address or an email address is always important, because in this e-commerce environment, anonymity is there. It's hard to find the actual person, and the more information that you report and the more information we can get and share, the better.
Thank you, Mary Lauren. I'm going to invite Jenny McDowell from INTA to jump back into the conversation in case she has any thoughts or observations, but also at the same time, I want to invite all of those attending today's briefing. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, for Jenny, for myself, please go in the chat, type in your question, and we're happy to try to answer those questions. I would also say that it's tremendously important that we have support from policymakers so that not only do we have the right tools in place legislatively, meaning effective statutes to push back against this type of criminal activity, effective resources in place for the agencies and departments that work tirelessly to try to prevent this type of activity, and also, of course, awareness for your constituents about the scope of the problem. These are all roles that policymaker, congressional offices can have in terms of pushing back against a tremendously serious problem, not just for our economy, but for the health and safety of our consumers. So with that, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Perhaps I'll just invite my colleague Jenny from INTA to share any closing observations she may have before we wrap up. Jenny?
Thank you, Frank. And I would just like to thank this really informative panel for all of these good insights and very helpful tips. I think it is only when we all come together, you know, when we're talking about the government, the private sector, the various stakeholders in this conversation, that we can actually hope to tackle one of the world's biggest problems right now. And that's quite frankly what we are dealing with. And I hope that by just shining a spotlight on the real economic and the real health implications of counterfeits, especially right now as we're all clicking and going to stores, I really hope that this kind of a panel discussion will highlight the need for further discussion, communication, working together, and really cooperation to try to stamp this out from both a supply side and a demand side. So I would just like to thank everyone on behalf of INTA.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And I want to echo those thanks for everyone who took time from a very, very busy day to join us today, both the participants on our panel, as well as those who took time to attend today's briefing. I'd also like to say if questions should come up following today's briefing, you can reach out to INTA, to GIPC, or the Congressional Trademark Caucus co-chairs offices, and I'm certain that they'll be able to direct you to the resources in today's briefing. I'd particularly like to thank our partners at the Iprcenter and CBP, echo Mary Lauren and Melissa's thanks for their great work trying to push back against a hugely serious issue. We see support for criminal enterprises and even terrorists through the financial gains that occur by the production and sale of counterfeits. This is a serious problem, well beyond what many people understand the counterfeiting threat to be. And it's going to take all of us to try and push back against this and keep American consumers safe. So with that, I wish everyone the happiest of holiday seasons. May all your purchases be genuine. And we hope that everyone has a safe 2022. And we look forward to working with you in the new year. Thanks again to our panelists, and thanks also to the CTC co-chairs and all the staff at the CTC for everything they do on these important issues. Thank you and take care.